This week's episode is brought to you by San Diego's The Amalgamated. The Amalgamated have just released their third album titled True Tone. This is their song, Golden Moon. The album was recorded at the After Hours studio in Ramona, California by Brian Wallace, aka Dub Robot. The band recently did a seminar at the Tiki Oasis in San Diego about the history of ska. They have been the backing band for Ken Booth and Errol Dunkley. Check out The Amalgamated's new album, True Tone, on Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, and visit their website, theamalgamated.com. And now, on with the show.
The Beat Girl is the cartoon drawing that the Beat commissioned as their logo. It came to represent not only the band, but two-tone ska, much like Walt Jabsco, which is the cartoon ska guy the Specials made. In the case of Walt Jabsco, his likeness was inspired by a photo of Peter Tosh from 1960s Jamaica. The inspiration behind the Beat Girl was taken from a photo in Melody Maker in an article about the two-tone ska revival. The photo is of Prince Buster dancing with a woman. Not much was known about the woman in the photo, even though she inspired an iconic image. Longtime ska fan Joanna Wallace wanted to know more about the woman behind the Beat Girl. So she did some digging. And some more digging. And she learned so much that she created a 30-minute documentary called Bluebeat Baby. You can see it on her YouTube channel, Miss Upsetter Designs. Today we talked to Joanna about her film, and her ongoing quest to uncover the life of Brigitte Bond, the woman in the photo. And Joanna still wants to know more about Brigitte. So if you know anything, email Joanna at brigittebond1964@gmail.com.
I had actually put off watching the documentary Joanna made until we were going to do this interview.
Oh yeah? How come?
I'm just busy, but you know what? It's only 30 minutes. I shouldn't have put it off. It's a really good documentary. More people should make 30-minute documentaries because everybody's busy.
And not every documentary has an hour and a half of content.
And I mean, also the story's not finished. Joanna's still doing research, still trying to figure out things about the Beat Girl. And maybe the Beat Girl's still out there. Maybe she'll hear this. That's
a very important point. And we'll get into this in the interview, but yes, Joanna is still looking for more information about Beat Girl. And so if anyone's listening and has any information at all that could be of use, even if it doesn't seem like it's very important, contact her. And, you might be able to help this documentary, become even more developed.
And if you haven't watched the documentary yet, you can pause this podcast and watch the documentary and come back to this, or you can watch it at the end.
Before we begin the topic we're talking about, why don't you tell people a little bit about who you are?
Oh, geez. I've been into ska most of my life. I am an artist. I'm a creator. I'm a huge nerd. Like, I'm a rude girl in the rude world. I don't know. That's really lame. Jesus.
What was your entry point into ska?
So my entry point wasn't necessarily chosen. So when I was a kid, I grew up in a suburb of Phoenix, in Mesa, and 80s, 90s kids, we just played outside all the time. And the oldest kid in the neighborhood would kind of watch over us. I thought he was really cool. He was into all sorts of music. So we always had music going on the boombox when we were outside playing as kids. But he would, when it was his turn, he would put on stuff like Skank and Pickle and Fishbone. And I was just like, oh my God, that's incredible. I didn't really connect the dots that ska was a whole genre and subculture until I hit junior high and met some of my fellow ska fans, and it's basically history from there.
I mean, junior high is not too bad. That's sooner than a lot of us figured it out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were like obsessed. We would go to shows all the time, sometimes 3 to 5 a week. We had a pretty healthy scene there. So it just became my whole life.
And so now you're talking about you make art, Miss Upsetter Designs. That's your brand.
Yes.
I know you make pins and different things like that. People can find you like on Instagram, or I think you have a website too.
Yeah, missupsetterdesigns.com, and I'm at Miss Upsetter Designs on Instagram.
So you made a documentary about who the inspiration was behind the English Beats cartoon logo that we refer to as the Beat Girl. Is that the official name of the character, or is that just what everyone sort of calls her?
Yeah, that's what it seems like she was named early on, but I think as time and ska oral history does its magic, she's gotten other names throughout her lifetime. But I think the Beat Girl or the Go Feet Girl are her official names. Yeah.
What are the other names?
Um, Beat Betty. I've heard Judy Jabsco. I've heard Margaret, which is weird because someone's not understanding song lyrics.
Oh, stand down, Margaret. Yeah.
And mostly like I've heard Walt Jabsco's girlfriend.
It's a little reductive.
Yeah, that's how we define women in ska. It's just
most people have seen the image of Walt Jabsco. That's the cartoon logo that is associated with the specials and two-tone label itself.
Mm-hmm.
That history was pretty well known. It was designed after an image of Peter Tosh from his ska years, and that was I think Jerry Dammers and Horace thought of the concept. And do you remember the artist's name?
Yeah, so it was Jerry Dammers who saw the picture of Peter Tosh dressed as Fred Cash of the Impression. So it's kind of meta already. And he kind of drew something up and connected with the artists over at Chrysalis. So Peter Wag was the creative director. David Story and John Teflon Sims were the artists and designers.
Yeah, I think I was watching. It was in the that noisy documentary about two tone.
Yeah,
was it David Story that they were talking to about it? Or was it the I can't remember if it was him or the other guy.
I think it was John Teflon Sims.
Okay. Yeah, he said that he specifically made the fist really big because he wanted it to convey aggression. So this image exists for a little while. The Beat, they kind of come a little bit after the specials and the Selector and Madness from Birmingham. They end up making their own cartoon logo. The story that I've heard, and I'm curious what your take on this is that Dave Wakeling supposedly said that, their early shows were just filled with men and very aggressive, and he wanted to encourage women to show up and men to kind of calm down, and that's why he made a female dancing logo. Is that accurate to your?
That's what I've heard too. So, I mean, I don't know how accurate as far as its effectiveness goes since I wasn't alive yet.
Yeah.
But if, he's a primary source, he's in the band, I believe it.
Both of these cartoons are pretty synonymous with ska and pretty synonymous with two-tone ska specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that they've gone beyond just people don't necessarily go specials, English Beat. They represent something greater than the bands themselves. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. It's the visual language of subculture is so important, and it transcends bands. If it's really good, it can be part of a movement. And at that time in England, there's a lot of great imagery, and I think Walt Jabsco and the Beat Girl are definitely up there. They have, I mean, you could go to any continent on the planet and see like a ska flyer, if they still make flyers, with them on it, and no, there's ska. Or same with Checkers, it's ska.
As a woman in the ska scene, the beat girl, was that like an image that was important to you, or what was the importance of that image to you?
Oh, it was like there aren't a lot of women in ska, if we were honest, um, and there weren't that many representations of women at that time, especially when I was growing up. Um, so seeing the Beat Girl and then seeing women in two-tone bands was like, holy crap! Like this is this is an image of equality that is awesome, and I loved the Beat Girl design from the get-go, and she was actually my first tattoo.
Where did you get it?
I got it right on my right bicep. Big,
Nice.
bold. It was not well done. I was tattooed way too deep. No, seriously, I got it removed, which makes me really sad. But she like blurred out so bad that people would like, it was the one with her and the record player, like asking if it's a woman cooking. Like, is that a stove? And I'm like, oh my God. And her face was just busted. So I got her lasered off, and makes me sad. But yeah, she was my first tattoo.
You could always get it done again.
I know. I've actually considered it.
You might have to now.
Yeah, exactly.
The Beat Girl was drawn by Hunt Emerson, who was a fairly well-known, like kind of counterculture cartoonist in England at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was taken from a photo that he saw in a Melody Maker issue in March of 1964.
79.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was of 79. Okay.
Yeah. So it was an article about the two-tone revival.
Oh, gotcha.
And
okay.
And they were kind of talking about the history of ska.
Gotcha. So I'm sorry, the photo was from 64, but the article was that he saw it in was in 1979. And it's a Prince Buster is dancing with the woman who was inspired the Beat Girl. I don't think so. Hunt didn't know who the woman was, and I don't know if the newspaper knew anything about her.
Yeah. There's no information about her in that article at all.
That's kind of where it stayed for a number of years. It was a woman dancing with Prince Buster. It was the inspiration, and you decided you wanted to find out who the woman was in that photo.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that first moment when you realized you wanted to go down this rabbit hole?
I've always wondered, who is she? What was she like? Because I think up until recently, most people had seen that image of Hunt Emerson's drawing holding kind of it looks like a gridded, Xeroxed drawing for reference, or photo for reference. And it's really hard to tell what she looks like because of the copying, and it just totally blew out her face, like my tattoo, ironically. And so she was kind of this, whatever you wanted to make her. And yeah, like I just wanted, who is that? Why has she had such an impact? And as I started to unravel the story, it just got more and more wild. I was not expecting this. I was not expecting to make a documentary. It wasn't like, but going back to like when I decided to dig into it, I was planning on continuing my Banbury Badge reproductions for my business. And I wanted to make something with a bit of a nicer face, like no offense to Hunt Emerson, but just something a little cuter, something that's more based on the woman, of the other photos I've seen of her with Prince Buster, and started doing image reference research and came across that eBay photo, or that photo I found on eBay.
Yeah. So before I'm curious about that experience, but yeah, so one of the things that Hunt has said in an interview is that he deliberately wanted to make it unclear what her ethnicity was. Mm-hmm. That was one thing that he and I think that's kind of what you're saying. He kind of wanted there to be a certain vagueness about her that you could sort of see whoever in it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found another quote from him that's kind of funny, I guess is the word. He was like, I don't know who she was. I wonder where she is now. Probably fat with 6 kids.
Oh, jeez.
That's awful. Yeah.
It's terrible.
I don't find that funny at all. No. It just shows like we don't view her as a human, really. It's just like this object. I don't know.
he probably didn't mean it in a cruel way. You know, he's probably being silly, but as a woman, I'm just like, oh God.
Yeah, but you
like,
can't help but bristle at that.
Yeah.
I know. I read that and I was like, ugh.
Yeah.
that's tacky.
Yeah.
So the photo you found. So first off, when in the documentary you show this photo, and I was like, my first question was, how did you even find this photo on eBay? Like, and how did you even know what to look for?
I just looked up Brigitte Bond.
Okay, so how did you know? Was her name already available?
Yeah. So there have been some photos, and this I think we'll probably touch on this later too, of just so much is getting digitized now, and
Mhm.
you know, probably within the last decade or so, there were some photos that were purchased as a collection by Getty Images, or you know, just like those stock image sites where you go for licensing. So once those popped up, that's I recall that's around when I learned her name. Like, oh my God, that's her.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you knew the name Brigitte Bond, and also you say this in the documentary. We'll clarify this here too. You've never heard her name pronounced, so you're guessing that it's pronounced Brigitte.
Yeah.
So it might not even be pronounced Brigitte for all we know.
Yeah.
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 You found this photo. What is the photo? Explain the photo itself.
So it is an actual archival photo from, you know, just what's the word? It's like Newsline, some company, you know, they would send out the news with pictures and stuff for newspapers across the world. And so it is an original photo with the story on the back. Uh, and the first line says, Brigitte Bond, who used to be a boy. And that was kind of like, wait, what? And then as you go on, it says like, oh, well, she used to be engaged to Sir John Waller. Like, okay, so we have nobility involved. And then it says that she has an inheritance. So it's just like, what? So that's what got me started being like, okay, I haven't heard this before. Let's start digging. And that's when I opened the Pandora's box, and it's still not fully shut. But seriously, it was like 5 months straight. That's all I did. It was like some sort of, I was obsessed, but it was like some sort of weird possession too.
Backing up just slightly on eBay, how much does a photo like this cost you?
It can really depend. I've actually been a fan of this medium for a long time. And I like to buy like really weird photos like that and frame them. So like I have photos in my hallway of like Geisha and Maiko bowling. Um, you know, just weird striptease stuff. Like, so I've always looked, I mean, it can go as low as like a penny to hundreds of dollars, depending on what it is. I would say average, you're looking 15, $20.
Yeah. But in this case, I mean, 15, $20 well spent.
Yes.
Especially when you turned it over and it had these notes on the back.
Yeah. Yeah.
The paragraph on the back of that photo is like, yeah, it's a crazy, like, you're like, oh my God, there's a crazy story here.
Yeah. And what's interesting too, if you Google Brigitte Bond, the first thing that shows up is one of those stock image sites. And this might change as, you know, internet changes. But when you go into that, the description is, it says that it says medical sex change, da da da. And I kind of blew that off initially because there is mismatched metadata and stuff that happens through the archival process. But when I found this particular photo, that I knew for sure it was not crossed metadata.
So back to the iconic photo that everyone has seen, that the cartoon was based off of. In the documentary, you have actual video footage of this whole experience. So Prince Buster comes to the UK in, like, what is it, February of 1964?
Yeah.
And his intention is to promote ska. Did he come to play ska, or was it more of a larger sense of promoting ska?
I think it's both. It's both. You know, ska that in 1964 was really being amped up to be like the next Mersey beat.
Mhm.
The music industry at that time, that was the nature of it. What's the new trend? And that's what they were promoting. And I think Prince Buster was particularly keen to this because he moved in and he was on ska immediately. He was flying, between Jamaica, the United States, and England pretty regularly to promote ska.
Now, it's my understanding that the U.S. had this trend, but this was a little later that it kind of start. This trend started in the UK first. Does that match your understanding of it?
It's around the same time. That's something I'm going to get into, I think, with my next project. But yeah, it does seem like there was a intentional effort to make ska happen, and it didn't happen like they wanted it to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's just like, so he tried, bless him, but capitalism got its way in the end.
Yeah, I've talked to some people. Like, I interviewed this band called the Marquettes, who are like a surf band, a U.S. like an L.A. surf band,
Mm-hmm.
and they got into the U.S. ska craze in like the summer of '64.
Oh, really?
And yeah, it was interesting talking to him because he was like, "Oh yeah, it was like it was the latest thing for like a really short time, and then it was gone." And
Yeah.
he didn't, there was very little understanding that this trend had its roots in Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if that would be the case in the UK, if they would have understood better its origins than, say, the US, where there's an even greater degree of separation from the subculture.
Yeah, I think that there was a bit more of an understanding, but I think, unfortunately, there's also a factor of racism, um, and that I think really shifted how ska was perceived initially. Because again, I want to go into this like in my next documentary. I'm like, oh my god, what have I started doing? Um, I'm sure you can relate, but so that the way that ska is talked about in the UK at that time, even like leading up to it, is so interesting. And the words that they use are interesting, like calling it insidious. Like, what the hell?
Mm.
So it's interesting how it was initially marketed and then reacted to. But it still got enough traction with young people, especially to become what it did.
I mean, like, there is a difference, though. Like, I mean, the trend that didn't really happen did sort of have a bigger impact on the UK and didn't linger longer because then you have the whole skinhead movement of the late '60s that did not happen here at that point. So
Yeah.
it seems like whatever was happening, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure, but it seems like that there was some movement.
Yeah. Well, I mean, having a Jamaican community there that is active in keeping up with Jamaican culture, that actively brings in Jamaican music. And so if you look at how the working class people that were living near each other, whether no matter their race, you were likely exposed to ska, rocksteady, reggae if you were in a working class or immigrant area, and continued to be exposed to that whether you like it or not, uh, if you are in those Jamaican communities.
Yeah, in the US, I think there was a bit more assimilation into American Black culture,
Hmm.
which is what the biggest indicator of that is the development of hip hop, where Kool Herc took who was a Jamaican, and took sound system culture, but adapted it with soul music and Black culture.
Hmm.
Whereas, like you're saying, in England, the Caribbeans were immigrant. It was more of an immigrant community, and then they did keep their culture intact more, and it did bleed into the larger culture to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this ultimately leads to, like I said, the skinhead movement, and then what ultimately then down the road becomes the two-tone revival scene.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, back to 1964.
Yeah, no, there's so much interesting
Yeah.
stuff of how subculture and music just spidered out, it's so fascinating. But I really do think all of the subcultures that we love, that we resonate with, started in Soho for sure. Whether
Yeah.
it's mod, rockabilly, ska, punk, you name it. It started in that square mile.
So when Prince Buster came to the UK, he was greeted by a group of fans, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Yeah. At the airport, some young mods came out, and he put on a little bit of a show for them.
And so Brigitte was one of those people.
Yeah. So she came out along with some other bluebeat artists at that time, to greet Prince Buster, and I wish there was sound. I wish I could know what was happening, but he had just arrived, and yeah, the fans had come out to see him.
Is there anything known about Brigitte before that moment? Because that's kind of where the chronology starts in your film as well.
Kind of, yeah. So she performed before that, just slightly before. So I think she was performing, but I don't know the full scope of it. And I also think at that time she was also, working in the Soho strip clubs.
So she was a ska singer as well as a dancer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's a side tangent. Ska versus blue beat. Is there a distinct difference?
Marketing. Sorry, I cut you off. No, I have my own theories. I think blue beat is, and I say this, as a very obvious American, I think that it is just a marketing thing for the UK. I mean, they refer to ska in the 80s, 70s, 80s as two-tone, even though it wasn't on the two-tone label. They just kind of referred to it as that. They'll in the Northern Soul scene, they'll say, "Oh yeah, I love these Tamla bands or these Stax bands." It's just like, oh, okay, it's not necessarily the artists; it's the sound. I also have a working theory, and again, I could be totally wrong, that ska just doesn't sound that good in those accents. I could be totally wrong, but I think it's just marketing.
Yeah. So, and blue beat's a UK thing, except that Chris Murray created the Blue Beat Lounge in LA in 2002, I think it was, or 2003. But it's interesting because I think the reason he created that, using that name, was because it was so unknown. And then it's like, you don't have to deal with the ska baggage. You don't have to deal with the reggae baggage. It's a term that people in the subculture know, and people that outside the subculture are like, what's blue beat? So it's interesting in that way, that it's kind of become one of those words where it's like it's an indicator of somebody involved in the subculture.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's interesting because like they named the label, and because it sounded, the original releases were kind of like blues and they had a different beat, so blue beat. And oh my God, I would have been so pissed if I were Siggy Jackson and all of these other bands were taking the term blue beat. I mean, even Island Records, which, arguably is, well, inarguably way more successful. They were using the term blue beat, but BLU-BEET or something like that. It's so bizarre. Like it's, I can't wait to dive into that because it is just so weird. Like I've been collecting stuff and I'm like, what the fuck was happening? just out of touch people, I think, was a big part of it.
Yeah. And so you found, so she did release just one record that you're aware of, or more records? Brigitte.
Yeah, so it says she claims that there are more records out there. I haven't found them. I found one that might be her, but it's Brigitte Saint Jacques. I don't know. I think it has a good chance, but I can't confirm it. So I didn't include anything that I couldn't like double verify in my documentary.
Yeah, that seems possible because later in the documentary, she's going by Brigitte Saint John.
Mm-hmm.
So Saint Jacques, you said? I mean, that's pretty close.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. And if we're already messing around with the spelling and stuff, then
yeah,
why not?
Why not?
So she's playing, you're kind of going through the scene, this whole scene and kind of where she's playing. Do you want to kind of set that stage a little bit of like what's happening in that area and what you're aware of that she's doing in this sort of 1964 time period?
So in 60s London, the Flamingo Jazz Club is where all of the Jamaican music was really happening. You had Duke Bin there, who he was the first person to have a Jamaican style sound system outside of Jamaica. And the clientele was typically a lot of West Indians and Black American airmen. So when the Profumo scandal hit and Christine Keeler and Johnny Edgecombe and all that whole situation happened, I think the military knew that there was some shit going down and they're like, nope, we got to get these guys out of there. We don't want to get involved with this espionage bullshit. Because of that, that opened up space for the new mod subculture to move in. So there was more space for mods. Mods picked up on ska, and that's how ska kind of worked its way into subculture. Yeah. So at that time, a lot of Jamaican music was just done in kind of like sound system dances. And, people could rent out a bar and like put on their own kind of little bluebeat nights. That was just the best, most effective way to do that. And also records were expensive. So people usually had to go out to be able to enjoy music. So 64 hits and bluebeat is planning to be the big thing. And bands are moving in on it. So Georgie Fame, who was the resident, him and his band were like the resident band at the Flamingo Jazz Club. They started getting involved with some Jamaican sounds. And I think that made it a little bit more approachable for some white audiences. Again, I can't prove that, but what I've read from people, it's like, oh yeah, like we're already into black music, we're already into jazz, why not Jamaican music? So that's kind of where it caught on. And yeah, and while Prince Buster was there, I mean, he recorded the I Feel the Spirit a few months prior with Georgie Fame. So there's that kind of cross-cultural connection. And he also appeared on Ready, Steady, Go, which was the show for teens at that time.
And so Brigitte at this time, she's singing at the various clubs in this sort of scene.
Yeah, so that scene, it just seems so interesting, super DIY, these clubs, these town halls, whatever. People were making things happen. A lot of bands were popping up. And she was singing at coffee shops, which were also, they weren't necessarily formal music halls, but that's where you could get together and make some noise with your friends. Skiffle got its nails or whatever into like seriously, Skiffle was huge there. And I mean, that's without that, there's not the Beatles. Oh gosh, I feel like I sound like that Charlie Kelly meme, with it's all of the conspiracy theory stuff. It is just so wild how small and interconnected all of this stuff is. I mean, yeah, the Beatles were probably hanging around at the Flamingo Jazz Club at that same time. Same with Rolling Stones.
I like to think about you working on your documentary and having a wall like that with all the things pinned to it.
I thought about, putting my face on that meme. But if I don't know if either of you've seen the show, like I think it was Inventing Anna. I was like that. Like I even had an emergency surgery in the middle of my research. I was like, no, I have to do my work this weekend. Yeah.
Back to the photo that sort of started it for you, the one you got on eBay. You said that this kind of it was off to the races from there. So what exactly happened at that point for you? What was your thought process about how to actually dig deeper into this whole thing?
Yeah. So I dug in initially with what are the details on the back of that photo. So I started looking into John Waller. I started looking into the trans community in London at that time. I started looking into just any little detail that I could and inched my way to creating a solid story.
Mm-hmm.
I could not find much on Google, and it is almost, I thought Google was pretty complete before. It's not. There's so much out there that isn't searchable through Google, so many different archives. And so I started looking through any archive that could somewhat be related to this topic. And I mean, so much of it was just irrelevant. So, yeah, digging through newspaper archives, looking through Ancestry and Family Search, looking through just, oh my gosh, you name it. Just reaching out to people, feeling like a creep, leaving comments. Like, I was desperate, man.
Were there any people who were instrumental in helping to point you in the right direction?
Yeah, so Heather Augustin, she's a friend of mine. So I had started digging into this on my own, and at that point I didn't think much else would come of it. Maybe I would put a little thing online, be like, hey, this is what it is. But I got stuck around 65, 66. And I knew Heather was writing her Rude Girls book because she interviewed me for it. So I hit her up. I'm like, hey, I know you wrote about Brigitte in Songbirds. Do you have anything on her? Like, I am just trying to find some answers. And so she texted me back and we had this kind of back and forth. I'm like, yeah, I know all that. And so we're like, okay, cool. Well, I'll let you know. So I shared all my stuff with her. She shared hers with me. And so that we kind of went back and forth with our research, but we were both stuck at that point. After that, I spent a couple weeks digging to try to find what happened to Brigitte, and she changed her name. Makes things really hard.
How did you find out that she changed her name?
Slowly and surely looking through like every Brigitte who's ever existed. Like seriously, it was awful. It was awful. Like I knew she had acted, or she said that she acted. So I went to IMDb and I started looking through every single Brigitte. And I did not find her on there. What I actually found that led me to her different name was a flyer through Ready Steady Gone for Brigitte St. John, the folk singer. And I just Googled Brigitte St. John. I didn't know it was a folk singer at that point. But I saw a folk singer and I saw a very pretty woman. And I'm like, oh my God, is this her? Is this her? And I spent a couple days just cross-checking as much as I could for Brigitte St. John to see it was her. I could not find it until eBay came in and saved the date again with another original news photo that said that she was a stripper who used to be a boy. So that was my smoking gun.
So you said that you looked at. So we'll talk about Sir John Waller after this, but because that's a crazy story.
The whole thing is.
but realizing that she was a transgender, you wanted to understand the LGBTQ community of that time and that place. So what did you discover about that?
Soho was a very gay, queer, LGBTQ plus friendly place.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the folks who were involved with music, especially the managers, were gay, like gay men. And I can't prove it, but I do think that Tom Littlewood, who was manager at Two Eyes, I'm pretty sure he was gay. John Waller was gay. I mean, it was a very LGBTQ community.
Yeah, the impression I got was that a lot of the same clubs, the like sort of the underground music clubs, overlapped with the LGBTQ community, whether or not they were directly part of that scene. It just seemed like all of the counterculture elements all commingled.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for anyone who wants what feels like an accurate depiction of Soho at that time, and there's not ska in this, but check out the movie Last Night in Soho. It is horror, and it's very good, but it was particularly horrifying to me at that time because it has to do with researching someone. Specifically a woman who, I won't spoil it, but I feel like they did a really good, and I kept coming across that team's research when I was researching Soho too. But it was a place where you could be who you wanted to be. I think that's the best way to sum up Soho. Even if you weren't that person yet, you could be that person in Soho.
So there was a freedom, there was a bit of an element of anonymity.
Yeah, and just like general acceptance, like kind of what stays in Vegas or what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas mentality there. And a lot of the clubs were considered private clubs, which allowed them to be exempt and operate outside of law. But a lot of those clubs were also owned by, criminal organizations. So a lot of the times the cops turn a blind eye because they were paid off. And if you weren't paid off, you could get raided.
I see. Okay. So they, the club owners knew how to stay in business and how to keep their clubs from being raided and keep everyone feeling like it's a safe place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, celebrities, it was a popular place for celebrities to go. Even after they became famous, Beatles, Stones, all of the big names that you think of when you think of the 60s would still go hang out in Soho because that's really where the new stuff was happening.
So, Sir John Waller, we'll just touch on this briefly because it was in that original photo. He was going to marry her in order to get his inheritance, but then either she left him or he, I don't know. You tell the story.
Yeah, I think the way it was portrayed is that they got engaged and it was quickly broken off because she was trans.
And like you said, he's a gay man. He wasn't marrying for love anyways. He had his parents were rich and were only going to give him his inheritance if he produced a son.
Mm-hmm.
And once the son reached the age of 10, then he would get his inheritance.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to speculate too much on that, but it almost that stipulation in inheritance, while I know it may be somewhat normal for nobility, it seems cruel in a way. It seems like people knew John was gay and that they wanted to change him.
Yeah.
So maybe getting him money motivated, I'm not sure. Again, I try to just keep my speculations out of the documentary because who knows? I mean, I have a feeling that they were both in on this. I have a feeling that this was pretty much a publicity stunt because John, throughout his escapades of being a bachelor, I mean, new shit every day. Like, oh my God, this went on, like he had the newspapers paying attention to his whole inheritance bullshit for like 15, 20 years. Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it's dumb. I don't know. In a way though, like these kinds of things were how people hyped themselves. Now we have Instagram, we have TikTok, we have all sorts of social media to get ourselves noticed if we're doing something.
Back then, you don't have that. It's hard to get on TV, especially when there's only a handful of TV channels. There's only a handful of radio stations, etc. So what do? You get yourself in the newspapers. That gets in front of a lot of people. And they both did an excellent job on that.
So okay, so that story kind of for Brigitte, that's just a little piece of her story. But I mean, obviously, it was significant for you for tracking down the bigger story. She was a singer, and you have record of her playing and singing at different clubs. But you also see that she's a dancer, a stripper as well, and an actor. Is this all happening at the same time?
I believe so. Yeah. And I think when people now hear the term stripper, it's a very different mental image than back then. And that's why I try to include some of it, but I also didn't want to get like my hand slapped from YouTube too much, but there were like weird little acts, strip clubs would have singing and dancing, and it was like a striptease, more like how we see burlesque today. I think is
Right.
more accurate. And at that time, depending on the location, women weren't allowed to get fully nude, and unless if they were standing still, they weren't allowed to move.
What?
Yeah, isn't that?
That is so weird.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. And so, like, women would come out fully nude on a stage, and it was almost like, a life drawing class or something.
And they just stand there.
Yeah, stand or sit, and if they moved, like sometimes cops would be there, the owner would get a ticket if she moved before the curtains went back. Yeah,
that's so weird.
It's so weird, but like some women did get fully nude, like Brigitte did, and it sounds like they got raided and they weren't paying off the cops or whatever, and she was caught. It was just, things operated on such a bizarre standard back then.
Yeah.
Now, see, it seems like also you kind of place her in the UK in the mid '60s, and then there's different periods of time where she's in Spain, Italy. She's taking trips to Africa. I don't know to what degree you have a solid sense of the timeline, but what is the best understanding of of her timeline? Going from the mid '60s to the '70s.
Yeah. So that's actually how I started my research, was just doing like a timeline. So, and then I built the narrative around that. But I was able to piece together her timeline based on a lot of advertisements of where she danced. So she went all over the world. And I think that because, certain newspapers and other things aren't digitized and archived online yet, I can't necessarily find those. But in that final interview she gave, she said that she'd been to every continent. I'm assuming not Antarctica, but yeah, like there was a very vibrant trans vedette scene in their circuit in the world, in Argentina, Japan, Mexico, all over Europe. These actors or these vedettes would just travel around and dance, live there for a little bit, and on to the next place.
And that was the circuit she was on, to your understanding.
Yeah.
And I know you did find record of like her in like one or two magazines, erotic magazines.
Yeah. It's one like photo shoot across 3 magazines by a publisher, and they put them out over a period of a few years.
Wait, what was the name of that magazine again?
There's Beautiful Brits or Beautiful Britons and Spick. I think like Spick and Span.
Oh,
kind of,
okay.
yeah.
I was like, what is this name?
Yeah. I think that's my assumption, but it seems like they really did not give a shit of what. I mean, they're just like, if you read through the articles, like they make no sense at all. And it's just, I mean, it's a nudie magazine. It's yeah.
So you're definitely not buying Spick for the articles.
No. I think in one of them, like the information is so wildly off about her. It's like, oh, her father's Russian and this and that. I'm like, this is not her.
So they're just making things up.
Yeah. And like with her age, I mean, they're like, oh, she's 22. I'm like, no, she's probably like 26 in this issue.
And then you also saw a couple instances of her being in movies.
Yeah.
This was while she was in Spain that she was in movies?
Yeah, I believe most of them were in Spain. So, they're not good. I'll straight up say they're like Mystery Science Theater level. So yeah, I think that she was doing those simultaneously while working, at a residency at some club. One of the movies, though, she did go to Egypt for.
And I know one of the movies was like she was a dancer for a dance sequence, but there was one where she had a line, right?
Yeah, she does have lines in the movies. Again, they're not that great. I mean, just the overall movies are not that great. I admittedly I did not watch all of them. I kind of looked for her because I'm like, this is so bad. I did watch all of Herostratus though. Not for me.
What was the there was a James Bond movie that she claimed to be in, but you could never really find proof that she was actually in it?
Yeah, Casino Royale, another stinker. Ugh. Sorry. I went over that fucking movie with a fine-tooth comb and it's not good. It is not good. Yeah, it's also pretty racist. So yeah, I mean it's got it all. But I think there's a high chance she was in that movie, but her scene was removed. The whole, I mean, that's a whole other story. I watched a documentary about the making of that movie, and it was just a nightmare. Like it was a nightmare to make. So yeah.
In what way was it a nightmare? The actors were awful, or production problems?
Like Peter Sellers being an asshole, being drunk on drugs or whatever, not showing up. Yeah. I think Orson Welles could only film like 2 minutes at a time because he would he would sweat through his costumes because the lights were so bright. And so yeah, they could only film a couple minutes of that a day, and those were in the casino where you have a bunch of extras, so it's just having to set that up multiple times a day. I mean, just you name it. They went incredibly over budget. So there might be footage of her somewhere out there, but I think I'm done looking for that because that movie's terrible.
You don't think you can endure any more Casino?
No, it's so like next level stupid. Like the best part is when Woody Allen dies. Like, I'm sorry, I'm being really mean, but it's just not a good movie.
Oh, I think I did watch that movie like years ago. Yeah, that is not. Yeah, I mean, I just chalked it up to like, it's just from a different era. Maybe it's just not for me, but yeah, maybe it is just a bad movie. Period.
Yeah, I don't think it was that well received either.
Okay, so tell the Billy Graham story.
Oh man, this is my favorite. This is my favorite thing about her. So, Billy Graham, if people aren't aware, was a very, very influential preacher or evangelist in the 60s. And he came to the UK and he went there multiple times. But in the 60s in particular, came in and I think in general, people were like, why? Like, we don't need, like, look at the state of the United States right now. Why do we want his level of evangelism in the UK? And I mean, of course, you have people who follow him and all that, but he took it upon himself to go down to Soho and talk to the sinners, try to let them know that they can come to Earl's Court and throw money at him or whatever. But it didn't go that well.
Yeah. Didn't go that well. I think a lot of people showed up because they knew it wouldn't go well.
And they just wanted to see the chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. And she made her way through the crowd. And I think if you look at the footage, you could see people know her. Like, people are cheering for her.
Yeah, you added some subtitles into the movie where you can, there's people yelling, "Hey, Bridget."
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's what they were looking for. She drove him out of Soho. And I think that's the only time that he cut a sermon short.
Now, you said something about how he was condemning miniskirts or something, and that.
Oh, yeah. He had made comments about, women's fashion then. How miniskirts create sin. It's like, come on, dude. But so she was chasing after him, saying, "What do you think of my miniskirt?" And I don't know if it's because I'm so deep into this topic or what, but I swear I can hear her voice slightly saying, "What do you think of," just barely in there. I have a feeling she was hounding him, and this wasn't the only time that she confronted him. Because you could see the staff like looking around, and he just knew immediately. He just was like, "Goodbye," and he's out of there. Like, I love that. And I mean, that's my headcanon of like, she's just stalking him.
Yeah. I'll accept that. I like that.
Yeah, me too. It seems like her to me.
Well, and my favorite thing about that scene too is she like climbs up on top of a car and she's trying to get his attention, and he's like shuffling away in the crowd, and she's like continually like trying to like shout him down, and you can see people kind of like, "Oh, hey, look at, she's up there."
Yeah.
And then she kind of like, somebody kind of helps her down, and she kind of slides down the car. Yeah. And then it just kind of turns into a photo shoot.
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh, well, now I'm on the hood of this car, so I guess I'll just get some cute pictures." Okay.
Yeah. And she just hams it up. Like, that's what she went. And that's another way she found her way into the newspapers again. And I love her for it.
So you put this film that you made that took you said 5 months to make it, or 5 months of research.
Mm-hmm.
Put it on YouTube. It's a half hour, but the movie isn't just a movie. It's also clear that you want to fill in the holes. You're hoping to put it out there to learn more about Brigitte and about areas in her timeline that you don't quite fully understand, or if maybe in fact if she's alive, to get in contact with her, all that kind of stuff. You're kind of putting it out there.
Yeah.
I'm curious, since you've put it out there, have you learned anything of particular interest to you? Have you gotten any leads of anything?
A little bit. And I'll put like a big asterisk on that. I mean, I've heard from people who saw her perform.
Okay.
So it just kind of confirms things, and it's mostly like younger dudes who frequented Soho and were like, "Oh yeah, she would get fully nude. She was loud. She was there." Yeah. I mean, that's the consistent story. So I've heard that. So that further paints a picture, and that's helpful too. Right now I'm waiting. I'm working something out with someone in Portugal to get some info that is hopefully fruitful. But yeah, language barriers, age. Unfortunately, a lot of people in that realm, their life expectancies aren't as long due to violence and all sorts of stuff. So it makes it hard. And I know I'm working against the clock because, unfortunately, people pass. Memories get lost. So I haven't heard anything substantial, but I'm still looking out there. I've been digging, in some of my low probability buckets. I haven't really found much.
Yeah, it was interesting to see, like, comments and stuff. People talking about having seen her like that. That's fascinating. I mean, people that were around that scene, yeah, they must be up there at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any theories as to?
Yeah, because just to be clear, I don't think we've said this before, but your last the last documentation you have of her was when, like, early to mid 70s?
Yeah, like 1976 in Spain.
Okay, so that's the last record you have of her.
Yeah. So she did a month-long residency at the Scarlet Club. She was doing like a tour of Spain at that time. And after that, it's just nothing. Just nothing. Yeah, so I spent a while thinking maybe she changed her name again. I'm going to look through more Brigitte's. I'm going to look through, I was mostly looking, in transgender archives and all of that, looking at the 60s, not really the 70s. And I haven't really found anything. I've reached out to some folks, and Heather Augustin has too, and some other folks who focus on trans history have asked around. No one knows anything yet.
So we kind of talked about this already in the Soho in the 60s was overall a welcoming place for people in the trans community. Does that remain consistent through the 70s?
I believe so. Soho has hundreds of years, like a couple hundred-year history of being like a red light district, and usually those places are where the people who general society doesn't accept go.
Mm-hmm.
So it was well known for its prostitution, even early on. I think starting 1700s or so, and it's just kind of stayed the same. There's been a lot of sex shops. There's been strip clubs. It's the land of sin. I've heard it's become quite gentrified at this point, but a lot of the buildings are still there.
Yeah, for the modern day images of the buildings in the film, how did you source those?
Google Maps, like just like trying to get the right angle that it matches with like an old picture.
I mean, that was the thing, is the angle's like really good.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
I was like, did you actually go all the way there just to take a picture of a chip shop?
I would love to go there and be a little creep,
Sure.
So
I mean, it's always weird to see these spaces that are now, maybe something more mundane.
Yeah.
And to think about the history in them.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm like not a religious person, that going there in Jamaica and stuff, that would be like my pilgrimage,
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting, unexpected story that sort of from our perspective begins with this cartoon or this logo,
mm-hmm.
and tells the story, but it's also like it still is an incomplete story. It's like there's still a lot we don't know. Like you don't really know who, like, much about her background, I assume, right?
Yeah, I mean her nationality kind of shifts, and that makes it hard. I think for sure she's French. I've been looking into history of Marseille and their textile businesses to see if I could find some name that is linked to her or something. I mean, that's what you got to do. But she was supposedly born in Malta around World War II, which makes things even more difficult to track down.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, so I guess, is there, I mean, I think this was a good opportunity to just reiterate, and if you wanted to, get the message out there to anyone listening that, that you're still, the story isn't finished, and that you wanted to, anything that anyone has to be helpful would be great. And what would be the best way for people to contact you if they had any information that could be of use to you?
Yeah, so I have an email set up that's specifically for this. So it's Brigitte Bond 1964. I flashed that several times in the video. I'm also working on getting, like last night, I installed a blog on my site. I'm like, okay, finally going to get the timeline down for this. One, so it's out there. Hopefully, if people Google things, they'll find me and share. And also, if people want to reference it and do their own research, that stuff is there. Or if they have the context. I know as an American who was born in the 80s, I don't have the same context as people who lived there or lived through that time. So I'm hoping that that will help generate more leads. But really, the thing that people can do that will help me the most is just share. Share, share, share. If you speak another language, let people know that the closed captions are translatable, because that's one of my biggest barriers is language. And I think a lot of older folks in that area of the world aren't necessarily using, social media. They aren't like findable, if you want to put it that way. So sharing, they probably aren't looking for this stuff, but they probably know something. I'm hoping to break into that realm and just get eyes on it.
Yeah. Because, I mean, the whole Soho scene and district, I think in a way that might be a little bit more approachable than trying to
Yeah.
look for leads in Italy and Spain and Africa
Yeah.
and these other places that she'd been.
Yeah. And I've tried that. Oh, that what I mean by being a creep in comments is just like these older folks' Facebook pages. And I'm like, okay, I know you were in the Cracksman and you played with Brigitte. Hello. Ugh, yeah. And I'm so uncomfortable with that stuff. Like, I am such an introvert. I'm so awkward. So yeah, like I haven't even like directly reached out to like Hunt Emerson or Dave Wakeler, or, just anyone directly like that. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just bugging them. Which I know that's not the case. It's yeah. I'm continually embarrassed.
Well, it's you spend 5 months beginning the process, and this could be another another period of time of the word getting out and people getting to the right people. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, part of that is also just like me resting my brain and like trying to pry my head out of my ass of just, so focused on this project and just trying to rest. Like I'm not exaggerating. I did like nothing else for 5 months. I worked, and then I would work on this every spare minute I had until probably 2-3 in the morning every day. It sounds kind of dumb, doesn't it?
No, it sounds great. So many people talk about doing a thing and then they don't do it. So it's always inspiring to see somebody follow through and finish them.
It's kind of funny because this also hit at a time where I'm like, I'm done with Facebook. Like this is so like I'm spending way too much time on here. And then I'm like, what else can I do to spend my time? Oh, I think I'm just going to go get obsessed with something that's never been done before. Durr. Like, so
Facebook, every time you try to get out, they pull you back in.
Yeah. No, I'll go back here and there, but I think I'm done for the time being. I've gotten a lot more good stuff done.
And had you ever done any filmmaking before this?
No, not
This is
like
it?
yeah, like I've done some editing and stuff. I mean I've done some like tutorials, but like nothing. I've never done like a research project at this level, and I've also never done editing or something at this level.
Okay, and then also just asking for myself, when you're filming the parts where you're talking into the camera, were you just there by yourself doing that?
Yeah. Yeah. Scroll back on my Instagram a little bit more, and you'll see outtakes of me going like, fuck, shit, I hate this. I wrote it in a way so I would have to be in there as minimally as possible.
Yeah.
But I also knew like having a person guide you through,
Definitely.
it helps. So I was like, ugh, the worst.
Thank you so much for listening to In Defense of Ska. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you normally stream or download episodes. If you haven't already, grab a copy of my book In Defense of Ska, available at clashbooks.com. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. It's at In Defense of Ska. And please consider joining our Patreon at patreon.com/indefenseofska. You will get monthly bonus episodes, extended interviews and commentary per episode, and access to the In Defense of Ska Discord. In Defense of Ska would not be possible without the great team that tirelessly works on it every week. So you should go check out their other projects as well. Co-host Adam Davis has an amazing band called Omnigon. Give them a follow on Instagram and Twitter. It's simply at Omnigon. And our editor, Chris Reeves, has a phenomenal record label and podcast called Ska Punk International. For more information, go to skapunkinternational.com. And if you've ever enjoyed one of the highly specific In Defense of Ska memes floating around the interwebs, it was likely the work of The Bands I Like Only Charge $18. Find them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And on that note, we leave you by saying, Ska now more than ever. Ooh, fun fact about this episode, 100th episode.
Damn, we did it.
Yeah, we did it. We're in the hundreds.
I mean, I do feel like that's kind of a milestone. A lot of podcasts don't even make it to 50. So pretty awesome. High five, Aaron.
Yeah. I'm there. I'm giving you a high five. Let's see. Okay.
Thank you.
This episode was very much about the Beat Girl. It was not about Joanna.
Yeah.
Our guest. But for the behind the curtain, our behind the curtains about Joanna.
Yeah.
So if you want to learn a little bit more about who Joanna is and her ska past and the shows she went to in Arizona growing up, this is the bonus episode for you to listen to.
We were just in Arizona. We talk about the infamous Nile Theater.
Yeah, Nile Theater is definitely the center of our conversation.
Yeah. And there's, just so you know, Nile Theater is kind of two venues. There's a upstairs venue and there's a downstairs venue that's very dungeon-like. And back in the day when Joanna was going to shows there and when I was playing shows there, it was a lot dingier. It's still pretty dingy, but it was dingier.
Yeah. So $5.
$5. Hey, you've heard us say it before. You're going to hear us say it again. This show is supported by folks like you. So if you want to be nice, sign up for the Patreon. We'd
be nice.
Love to have you there.
Next week, we got Eric Din and Paul Jackson from the Uptones, who were basically the first Bay Area ska band.
Bay Area ska legends.
They influenced Operation Ivy and Rancid, and then both Paul and Eric played with Rancid on a few occasions, and we talk about that too. So make sure you listen.
Tell your friends.